Files, Dropbox, and space save. Okay, can you see the Form 21?
Yes.
Oh, awesome. Okay. I'm not real good at highlighting and stuff, but at least you can see the form.
Yeah, that's okay.
So have you taken the first segment of the class?
For forms,
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I know I took 2 other classes with you a couple months back, but I don't know if that was what I was supposed to do.
Okay, well, I don't know which ones you took, but
No, I don't either. I don't remember.
but oh, here I have another participant. Let's see if I can figure out how to. Okay, so Manuel, let me admit him. Okay. Hi there.
Hello,
How are you?
I'm doing good. How about you?
Oh, good, thanks.
Cool.
Okay, I'm gonna like try and keep an eye on my waiting room there, just in case anybody else comes in. So last week I had to cancel the class for the first segment of this series, which is part 1 of the purchase and sale. So I thought I would kind of, usually I do the first half of the purchase and sale on the first class, second half of the purchase and sale on the second round.
Okay.
But I thought since I didn't give last week's class, I would kind of start at the beginning and try to zip through the entire purchase and sale in one class. Are you guys up for that?
Perfect. Yep.
Works for me.
Okay. If anything, if it will serve as a good review for you. And as always, feel free to ask questions as we go along. You don't have to wait till we end. And I do have the form pulled up here, and we'll go through it kind of line by line. So next week in the class, we would be doing commonly used addenda, and then the final class of the month is for the inspection forms and process. So I'm really glad you guys are here. Thanks for coming. And
Thank you.
yeah, remember that you do get 2 clock hours. Once you have completed all 4 of the classes, you get 2 clock hours for each of the classes. And just a
Okay.
little housekeeping matter, I usually take a break a little before 3 for 15 minutes or so, and then we come back and finish up. So a clock hour in Washington is actually 50 minutes. So we've got a little leeway and a little time to have a little breather in the middle of the class, which is helpful for me because I usually have a phone call or 2 that I need to return quickly, so they don't have
All
to
right.
wait after 4. I use Form 21 for the Firm's Mastery class for purchase and sale because it is the most commonly used one, the residential purchase and sale. In format, it is very similar to the other purchase and sale contracts, those being Form 20, which is multifamily, 23 is manufactured homes, 28 is condominiums, and 25 is vacant land. So this should familiarize you with kind of the basics of the terms, and we'll expand on some of those terms. The lines on the first page of the purchase and sale, line 1 through 18, have corresponding paragraphs on the subsequent pages. So we'll kind of flip back and forth and talk about some of those paragraphs that expand on the single lines that are contained on that first page of the purchase and sale. The other thing I want to mention to you is when you pull up a form on the MLS Express Forms, off to the right side, there's it just says man, and it's short for manual. And what it is it's a kind of a basic synopsis of how to fill out the form. So that can be kind of a good reminder if you're thinking, oh, what do I put in this section? You can read through the manual, and that might like spur your memory and, oh yeah, that's how we do that one. So don't overlook that as a tool for you, especially when you are, just starting out. And remember too, that before you send any document out for your client's signature, your mentor should be putting eyes on it and making sure that everything is complete and correct before you send it out for signatures. And if they're not available, reach out to me. Best way to contact me outside of the business day is to shoot me a text and say, hey, I need you to look at a contract. Usually I'm not sitting in front of my computer on the weekend, so I need a bit of a heads up so I can get to a place where I can actually look at your contract. And I prefer those to be emailed because it's just awfully small on my phone to go through, 20 pages of a contract. So do you guys both have my contact information?
I do not.
Sure.
I believe I have email, and I'm sure I can find your phone numbers on the MLS, right?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
should be on my signature line too. And I know I accidentally sent you an email earlier today. But my
Yes,
phone
I was
numbers,
confused.
yeah, sorry about that. The darn auto-populate. So it's 253-709-5513.
Okay.
And I can talk to you as well, but a lot of times I'm driving around or, so just shoot me a text and tell me what you need, and then I'll either call you back or, hop on my laptop so I can look at your contract if you
All
need.
right.
During the business day, you can, email me or text me or stop by the office, here in Federal Way. Occasionally I will be out for a class or an event. I am going to be out of the office tomorrow for a class. But that's why it's handy to have my text, put my info in your phone, because invariably when you need it, you're going to be out and about and you're going to have a time sensitive matter. And I want you to be able to get the help you need. Remember that when we're writing a contract, for legal purposes, we are licensed to fill in the blanks of these forms that have been prepared by attorneys, and we're held to a similar standard of accuracy than an attorney would be held. If we incorrectly fill in the blanks, we might render the contract void or voidable or unenforceable. And we certainly don't want to create any opportunity for future litigation between the parties. One of my goals in this role is to try to keep people out of court, and that not only includes the brokers, but our clients as well. So there are some recurring problems that happen when people are filling out these forms, and I'll try to focus on that along with explanations and the significance of each of the items. So were either of you in business prior to mid-July?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So you know that the forms did change in mid-July. So
Yes.
I will be talking a little bit about those changes just to, reinforce your understanding of those. A lot of times when you've learned something, sometimes it's hard to unlearn something. But we have the most current version of the Form 21 available to us in MLS. And, when you go into transaction desk to create a transaction, that's the one that's going to pull through. So that's a good thing. remember that when you are writing a contract, you have to represent one or the other party. You can't just write up a contract for a fee. That would be practicing law without a license. This morning, I had a problem with a closed deal where there was, I hesitate to call it an addendum, but it was a statement that was signed by the buyer and the seller. It was written up by the buyer's broker, and it was not written on an MLS form. It was just written on a blank piece of paper. And it was about replacing a debt that was supposed to be done by closing. And then the selling broker had written void over it in purple marker. Well, where do I start with the amount of problems with this document? First of all, it wasn't written on the proper form. We're not licensed as, we're not attorneys, so we can't prepare legal documents outside of the statewide forms. Again, that's practicing law without a license. Then this was a condition that was to be fulfilled before closing, and closing was on August 18th. So that's the next problem. The third problem was that you don't void an agreement by simply writing void over it. You have to have some kind of statement that counteracts that original statement. So rather a complicated mess. But since there had been some conversation between the brokers about recreating this agreement to be in effect after closing, which, by the way, I do not ever recommend. Don't create post-closing conditions. That opens the door to liability because our agency duties are concluded at closing. Then we no longer have an agency relationship with our principal, with our client, because the contract's done. So I recently had a deal where the agents had created a post-closing condition to have the house cleaned 2 days after closing, and they were going to let the cleaning ladies in, the listing brokers. Again, where do I start with this? Well, first of all, they had no legal right to be on the property because it was now the property of the buyers, not the sellers. So they should not have retained any keys, or they certainly had no legal right to be on the property. And by creating this post-closing addendum, it kind of put us into, condition on an addendum, it put us into this legal gray area of responsibility. Now, to add to the complications, and you stop me if you were at the meeting where I talked about this already, but to add to the complications on this particular transaction, the day it closed, it was burgled, and some things were taken, some things were damaged. And then the final wrinkle was that some of the items that the seller was to have left in the property per the contractual agreement were accidentally taken by the movers, including 2 TVs and the patio heaters. So you can see by this brief description why I don't like post-closing conditions at all. The first case I told you about, I'm waiting for a legal opinion on. The second one has been resolved, but it did cost the sellers something, and it cost our brokers something. But on the plus side, we had the buyer sign a hold harmless agreement, and thus we have closed that window of possible liability for the firm and for the brokers. But that was kind of, I would say, kind of an expensive lesson for the brokers. Okay, we're going to start up here with line 1 on the, I wonder if I can figure out how to highlight. Line 1 on the purchase and sale, where it says date, MLS number, and offer expiration date. Have either of you written a contract yet?
Yes.
Oh, awesome. Were you the buyer's agent or the listing agent?
The buyer's agent.
Oh, perfect. Emmanuel, how about you? Okay, I can't see you, so, and I can't hear you, so I don't know if you're still with us.
Oh, I'm sorry. There we go.
Have
No,
you
that
read the contract yet?
yeah, but it's been almost 2 years where I've kind of I've been off the grid with real estate because my dad had passed away and I went into this very high depression and I got out of it earlier this year, but I'm ready to get back in the game.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. I mean, I'm sorry
Thank you.
for your troubles, but I'm glad you're back in real estate. And I
Yes,
think, I'm really glad you're taking the class. I think that it will come back to you. But
of
there have
course, yeah.
been, there have been some changes in the form, so good job taking the class.
All right, thank you.
So line one, we're just going to fill in the date that we're writing the contract. This isn't the closing date. It's not the expiration date. It's just today's date, just a reference point, right? MLS number, that's of course going to be on the listing itself. When you're creating a transaction in Transaction Desk, if you put in the correct MLS number, then it's going to auto-populate your forms for you with the information that's contained in the listing, like the seller's name, listing, broker, and all their contact information and the address and so on. So that's going to be very helpful for you. So just pop in the MLS number. As I think it's also good to have some public information when you're writing an offer. I would like to get a trio from the title company. You can tell from the listing if title has been ordered or not, and usually it has. And then you can contact the title company and ask them for a trio, and that is a property profile, a legal description, and a map. And it's just handy to have that. Once in a while, somebody will upload an incorrect legal description to their listing. So it's a good thing to cross-check. And that packet of information is just a good thing to have in your transaction file. It kind of indicates a level of competence for you as a broker, and it does give that good cross check. And you can always send that to your clients too and impress them with your thoroughness. Expiration date. So here's one that has a corresponding. Let's see if I can get out of this. A corresponding paragraph on its paragraph S. I'm going to scroll down to S. If no expiration date is specified for a counteroffer, the counteroffer shall expire 2 days after the counteroffer is delivered. So even if you put nothing there, your default time frame is going to be I'm not doing too well with my highlighting, 2 days after the offer is delivered to the other party, right? So Charlie, when you wrote your offer, how did you decide what to put in for an expiration date?
I'm sorry, I got a phone call right when you said that. What did I decide?
Oh,
What were you
how
asking
did
what I
you
decided on?
how did you determine what your offer
Oh,
expiration date
it's
was?
still not letting me hear you since this incoming call is coming in. Let me swipe, swipe, swipe. Come on, swipe. Okay, there we go. Okay, what were you asking what I was deciding
Oh,
on?
when you wrote your offer, how did you decide on the establishment of your expiration date?
Well, I just did it based on just kind of what I knew was being in high demand for the market. I knew that, there's not a lot of competition out there. So I usually gave them 2 or 3 days to let me know. That way they're not holding on to my offer and waiting around for another buyer. They have, just a few days to respond to my client, or else we're going to go on to the next one.
Exactly. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a balancing act. You do want to look and see if they have any comments in the listing about that response time. Say that it's an estate sale and there are 4 heirs and they all live in 4 different states and none of them are in our time zone. Well, they might put something in their listing like estate sale, out of state sellers, please allow 5 days for response. Because see, they've got 4 people to get a hold of, review the contract with and, get everybody to agree on a response. So if there's something like that, you can accommodate that. And that sets kind of a good tone with the listing agent as far as establishing a good working relationship for future negotiations by respecting any special circumstance they might have. But Charlie's point for, is it Charlie or Charlie? I want to know how to say.
No, like Charlie Brown.
Okay, Charlie. You have a good point that you don't want to give them so much time that they're going to try and generate another offer that's going to beat yours. And that can happen if you say, oh, all things being equal, just let us know in a week, 7 days out or something. Well, what would you do if you're the listing agent? I know what I would do. I would be calling everybody that's showing the property and saying, hey, I've got an offer on the table. Can you get your buyers off the fence? And I'd be trying to generate additional offers to compete with the one that you've submitted. So you want to give the seller enough room so that you're showing professionalism and consideration, but you don't want to give them so much room that they're going to, use that time to up the ante with other possible offers. So if you have a bank-owned property, they work on their own timelines and the expiration date doesn't really mean a whole lot to them. But a lot of times in their offer instructions, they'll tell you how much time to put down on your contract. Who knows, we may have more bank-owned properties in the future. I hope not, but it's possible. So one thing I like to do when I was writing an offer was I would kind of have a list of questions for listing agent, for the lender, and then of course you're asking your client as you're working on the offer together. So you can just take a notepad, divide it into 3 sections, LA, buyer, and lender, and jot down your questions. So you have confirmation on these answers before you send the offer out to be evaluated by the seller. So first question is, offer expiration date. That would be a question both for your buyer. How much time do you want to give them to, respond to your offer? And it kind of depends what time of day you're sending it over to. If you're sending it over first thing in the morning and you give them 1 day, say it's Thursday morning, then they've got till Friday night to respond. And that's essentially 2 days. That really should be plenty. But that is a question. If there's no verbiage in the listing that you can double check with the listing agent, say, are there anything with the seller logistics that would prevent them from responding to us, by tomorrow night? And again, that sets a nice tone of professionalism with them. Remember that acceptance has to be communicated in writing, and that needs to happen within the time frame that you've specified by putting in your offer expiration date. And just because there's a default of 2 days on that, don't leave it blank. I don't like blank spaces on contracts. Go ahead and fill that in. Then it's really clear to everybody. So button that section up. And as far as the next line, buyer's name. So let's talk a little bit about that. So it says buyer status. So obviously you're going to want your buyer's name, but maybe they go by their nickname and that's how you know them. That's what's in their email, and that's all fine. But what this information, where you put the buyer's name in, that is going to be how they're vested in the property. In other words, how their name is going to read on the title that transfers ownership from the seller to the buyer. So it's important to have their correct legal name on line 2. How do you know what it is? Well, what's on your driver's license? That's it. Now, whether or not to include middle initial or middle name, that's going to be a combination of buyer preference and lender requirement. So that's something to ask the buyer and the lender. And then the status, that means marital status. And this is important because we live in a community property state, right? But this can be reflected in a number of different phrases. Say your buyers are 2 unmarried people. So it could be Jan Jones and Bob Smith. Well, I should say his correct legal name, Robert Smith. Single people, or it could read Jan Jones, a single person, and Robert Smith, a single person, or they could be an unmarried man, or an unmarried person, or an unmarried woman, or an unmarried man. So there are a lot of, ways to express the same thing. It could be husband and wife. It could be a married couple. So you need to ascertain their marital status. A lot of times, I have seen this a lot of times in escrow where people will say that they're single, but in reality, they are in the middle of divorce proceedings that have not yet been finalized. So even if they're legally separated, guess what? They're still married, and the laws of community property still apply. Likewise, sometimes you will have buyers, maybe they're an engaged couple, they're going to get married. Find out when that wedding date is. Is it going to be before closing? Because that's going to change how all the loan documents read, how all the vesting documents read, how all the escrow documents read, and we want to have everything matched up. Now, if something changes unexpectedly, once I had a couple elope in the middle of a transaction. So then we put an addendum on the contract to, correct their marital status. And then, of course, the lender had to redraw all their documents. So that was fun. But we managed to get it done in time, and it didn't delay closing. So legal names for your clients and marital status. Same with the seller, although all you really know at this point is what's in the listing. And then you can also cross-check that with property tax records. You guys all know how to click on the property tax ID number in the listing, and that takes you to Real List. Right?
Yes.
Okay. So then you can see who is the legal owner of record on the county records. So it's always good to cross-check that. Why? Well, just in case there's a fraudulent seller. Or maybe it's still in someone's name that has died, but the estate hasn't yet been probated and title hasn't been perfected to reflect the fact that the decedent is no longer entitled. So a decedent is a dead person. So maybe that needs to be corrected. Maybe the county records are showing a different seller name than is in your listing. That could be a fraudulent seller. That happens mostly with vacant land. That fraud has been perpetrated mostly in those kinds of transactions. And other red flags there would be someone who wants to sell it in a hurry. They're out of state and only want to communicate by email. So if you have like a combination of those factors, that's a red flag. You can always send it to me and let me look at it too. Like an email from somebody that seems fishy to you. I get those occasionally from the brokers. And then we make a we do some checking and make a determination if it's on the up and up or not. And usually it's not, if we have several of those factors in one communication. The legal description is required by the MLS to be attached to your listing. So you definitely want to go into the supplements on your listing that you're writing the offer for and download that and include it with your offer for your buyer to initial prior to sending it over. It needs to be attached to as part of your residential purchase and sale. And if we don't have a legal description, it makes the contract unenforceable. So that may be why the MLS, they didn't always require the legal description, but it's very handy now to have that in your attachments. They do fine people too for not including their legal description in a listing. They'll give them a warning, and then if they don't fix that, they will fine you. So again, you have prudently ordered that trio from your title company so you can cross-check your legal description, make sure they've got the right one on there. You know, listing brokers are human too, and sometimes they upload the wrong document. You know, MLS isn't going to cross-check it against legal records, but you need to make sure too that say that your buyer is buying 2 parcels in one transaction. Make sure that both the parcel numbers are on your purchase and sale. I have seen this where a buyer looks at a property and there are 2 parcels involved and they write an offer thinking they're getting both parcels, but the listing only has the 1 parcel. And if you don't include all the relevant parcel numbers, guess what? Your buyer hasn't bought them. They don't have a legal right to them. So important to have, see how this level of correctness is and detail is really critical, because this is a legal document involving hundreds of thousands of dollars. So we want to really fully understand it. Line 5, included items. So this line is tied to paragraph C on page 2 of the purchase and sale, included items. So here, you know, on the first page, it just lists the different appliances, but here it says exactly all the items that are expected to be included. So we're talking built-in appliances, carpet, curtains, television antennas, ventilating, air conditioning, heating fixtures, trash compactor, garbage disposal, fireplace logs, gas logs, and lighters, irrigation fixtures, electric garage door openers, water heaters, electrical fixtures, lighting fixtures, shrubs, plants, and trees planted in the ground, other fixtures. And then this is new, all associated operating remote controls and access permissions. So that means if you've got an electronic lock for your front door, or a lot of people have garage door remote openers, the contract provides for those access permissions. So in other words, your code, seller has to provide a code to the buyer. And having said that, if you've got a buyer, remind them that it's an excellent safety measure to change their codes and change their locks as soon as they move in. That's the first thing they should do. And it's just, then you know that nobody else has a key to the house or an access code to the house except for you and whomever you choose to give that information to. People will give this information out to contractors that come to spruce up the house prior to listing. Maybe they give it to a friend or a neighbor because they're going to be gone on vacation in Mexico for 2 weeks and they want somebody to have access to the house to check on the cat or something. Or, you know, maybe they gave a key to Rover, you know, so they could check on their pets. Maybe they gave it to a cleaning lady. We don't know. Get those changed. And even if, I will say too, even if you don't have a code, you know, the internet has this information. That's the last time I moved. I didn't have, like I had a keyless garage door entry. I didn't get the code for it. I just Googled it. And it took me about 5 minutes to change the code on that, and no problem. So I I haven't really researched electronic door locks, but from what I've seen, you can Google those by brand and get the instructions on how to change them. But sometimes you do need the original code to do that. So this provision gives the buyer the right to that information. Now, a change in the paragraph 5 here on the first page is that it's made all of these appliances multiples by adding an S to most of them. So if there's more than one refrigerator in the house and you check refrigerator, that means because that S is on the end, that means your buyer's going to get both the refrigerators. Same with all of these that have multiples, you know, attached TVs, speakers, cameras. We're seeing a lot more security cameras, and doorbell cameras. Maybe you would say they're one and the same. If there is something that's been excluded in the comments of the listing, then you would want to put that in your 22D optional clauses. And there's a place for that where you can say what items are being excluded. And you can tell what those are because in the listing, it will say something like, you know, hot tub does not convey, or refrigerator, chest freezer in garage goes with cellar, or living room chandelier goes with cellar. Sometimes people have sentimental attachment to certain things in a property, sellers do, and so they want to exclude them. I have a friend who dug up a rhubarb plant from her mother's garden when they sold her house. That was very meaningful to her. She wanted that rhubarb plant. It was 50 years old. So you just don't know what people are going to exclude. But if you do see these things excluded, or you get information from the listing agent that certain things are not going to be included, you know, be sure and share that with your buyer so they don't get their heart set on that chandelier in the living room that, you know, was great grandma Agnes's, and that means a lot to the seller. Make sure that you tell them it's sentimental value, and you can put something in your contract, put a phrase in your contract saying that it will be replaced, you know, with either something that your buyers pick out, or your buyers are going to get a credit for that, or you know, it'll be replaced by something of equal value. I don't know. One time I bought a place and there was a shelf in the kitchen, like a floating shelf, you know, and the sellers took it. They didn't tell me ahead of time, but I thought, well, maybe it was something Uncle Phil made in shop class or something. It was a little hand carved wooden shelf, and they just couldn't bear to leave it behind. So to me, it wasn't a big money item. I just lived without it, and it wasn't a big deal. But it's all about managing your buyer's expectations, right? So make sure that you talk about these things. Likewise, if the sellers say the washer dryer don't go with the property, but your buyer says, gee, I just love that washer dryer, and it would be, you know, I'm coming from out of state, I don't know the stores around here, and those fit into that little laundry room so perfectly. I think it'd be really hard for me to find something that fit in just as well. Can we ask for those? Well, sure we can. Just like the seller has a price listed it in the listing, it doesn't mean we have to give them that price. We're making an offer. So if your buyer wants to ask for something, a refrigerator or another appliance that's not included in the listing, they can sure do that. That's totally within their rights. Okay, how are we doing so far? Anybody asleep yet?
So far, so good.
Okay. Okay, purchase price. This is kind of a fun one. A lot of times buyers will ask you, how much should we offer? How much should we offer on the house? I would not directly tell them a price. If the offer doesn't work out for their satisfaction, guess who they're going to blame? I would do,
Me.
yep, their broker. So I would do a market analysis and share that with them. Keep a copy for your file. And after they've made the decision and reviewing and discussing the CMA with you, that's what you write on line 6. So line 6 has a corresponding paragraph, paragraph A. And this is a good one to read over because it says buyers paying seller the purchase price in cash at closing. And buyer says they've got the money to do it. And then there's a little wire transfer warning. So what this means is that your buyer's committed by signing this agreement to paying cash, unless there's an addendum that says it's contingent on them getting financing of some kind. So that's where your 22A financing contingency comes into play. That makes the agreement conditioned on the buyer's ability to get their loan. Charlie, describe how you set a price, an offer price when you wrote your offer.
Well, the last couple that I wrote, we did just offer the seller what they were asking for because they were FHA and we were going to have to ask for closing costs. So we just wrote it for what they were asking for, and then we put all that other information in.
And did it appraise?
Yeah,
Oh,
both of
good.
them did.
Oh,
I know.
awesome. Yeah. Well, then that was the right price because it, it appraised. A question to ask a discussion to have with your lender, the buyer's lender, before you even go shopping is what your people are qualified or pre-approved price. So what can they afford to pay? And if they need closing costs. The other question, the correlative question with your buyers is what do you want to pay? Because the lenders don't always know what other financial goals or commitments the clients have. Maybe they are, I don't know, maybe they want to start a college fund for a child. Maybe they're saving for their dream trip to Europe. Maybe their car is on its last legs. A lot of times people will not want to spend the entire amount that they're qualified for because they don't want to put all their eggs in one basket, so to speak. They want to have some discretionary income to apply to other goals. So they might be pre-approved for more than they actually want to spend. And that's an important conversation to have with your clients because you want to show them what's in the appropriate price range for what they want to spend and what they're pre-approved for. Now, I personally always like to have a pre-approval letter that was specific to the offer I was writing. Because if you just get one pre-approval letter, say your buyer's pre-approved for a purchase of $600,000, but they see a house that they really like and it's $575,000. Well, you don't want to give the seller a pre-approval letter saying the buyer's pre-approved to spend $25,000 more. You want to have that tips your hand for negotiations, right? So it's better to have that pre-approval letter changed to meet that specific offer. So if you're offering $575,000, get a pre-approval letter for $575,000. It worked for me. And then, of course, if you do get into a space where you are upping your ante, you're upping your offer, well, you're going to need another pre-approval letter too. But that's doable, very easy to edit these things for the lender. So you definitely want to have your buyer's lender on speed dial when you're in this process so that you can get those pertinent documents and information from them. Earnest money. Now, earnest money serves two purposes. One is it says to the seller, I want to buy your property and here's some money to prove that. So just as it's named, it means they're sincere and earnest about wanting to buy the property. The other function that earnest money serves is that it is liquidated damages. So if the buyer defaults, if they want to get out of the transaction and they don't have any contingencies to exercise, then they would sacrifice that amount of earnest money. That's a discussion to have with your buyer before you go shopping, even really, or when you're shopping, is they will ask you how much earnest money should I put down. And there is no required amount of earnest money. A kind of a general rule of thumb is about 1%. It can be more, it can be less. It can actually be none. No earnest money is required for the validity of a contract. It's about the only time you see a contract without earnest money, because sellers like to see that the buyer has some skin in the game, that they have, and it shows some liquidity in their finances, that they can afford to, put some thousands of dollars into escrow for a month while this process takes place for their loan processing and closing. About the only time I don't see earnest money on contract is like if it's a family deal, grandpa selling their house to grandson or something like that. Or if, say, a long-term tenant is buying a property from their landlord, maybe, in that case, maybe the utilities are already in their name and, it's kind of a streamlined transaction. But most of the time you do see earnest money for the reasons I just described. You want to find out from your buyer if that money is readily available in their bank account. Is this liquid? Do you have to maybe liquidate some non-liquid assets, like converting an investment account? Is the earnest money coming as a gift from a relative? And if so, what is the availability of those funds? And that leads into, when can we get the earnest money deposited? So you do have a blank here to fill in on when you deliver earnest money to escrow. And this is page, it's tied to paragraph B on the second page, where this talks all about earnest money. This is all about earnest money. Fun. So there is a default of 2 days after mutual acceptance. But talk to your client. Is 2 days doable? If the money's coming from a great aunt who lives in another state and she's going to write a check out and put it in the mail, or maybe she's promised the money, but she's visiting another relative for 2 weeks and she, or on a trip, or a lot of times we see people who have relatives outside the country. Maybe it's China, maybe it's Canada, who are providing earnest money. We have to talk about how long it's going to take for that process to complete itself and how much time they actually are going to need. Because if they don't deposit their earnest money on time, then the buyer's in default and the seller can terminate the transaction for failure to deposit earnest money. Now, what if you have a situation where the buyer says, oh, no problem, I can, deposit the earnest money in 2 days. So on the second day, you call your buyer and say, did you get your earnest money in? Because it's due today and I checked with escrow and they haven't gotten your deposit. What's going on? And your buyer says, oh, I tried to go on that portal for the escrow company, but they wanted me to create a account, and then I had to put in a username and a password, and I was really busy at work and I didn't have time to do it. And now the escrow company said it's too late to wire today anyway, because the Federal Reserve Bank is on East Coast time, and so I'm not going to be able to get it in today. What should we do? What should we do? Well, very easy to solve this. You call the listing agent and say, yeah, we got a logistical problem, but buyers got the money in their account. We just need to iron out the process for them of getting it wired in. We're going to do it first thing in the morning. My buyer's going to go to the bank and get that wire initiated. I'm going to send over an addendum to you, signed by my buyer, that says earnest money will be deposited tomorrow, or whatever. Make up your own scenario, whatever day they need, however many days they need. But I would provide the anecdotal information to the listing agent. I wouldn't just send over an addendum saying earnest money is going to be deposited later, because it's a little easier to swallow for the seller, and you're more likely of getting an agreement from them right away if you explain. Or maybe it's something like, buyer's a single woman and she has the flu and she can't get to the bank, in time, or whatever it is, just explain the situation, assure them that the buyer has the funds on hand, and that once you solve whatever the problem is that's keeping them from making their deposit in a timely way, that it will be deposited, and usually that'll be just fine. And as I mentioned at the meeting on Tuesday, do not use a promissory note for earnest money. Okay. It is just before 3, so let's take a little break. I'm not going as fast as I thought I would, but we're doing all right. Well, we're going to get through everything. Let's take a little break till like 1/4 after, and then we will come back and work on the rest of the form.
All right.
Any questions before we break?
Not yet.
Okay, awesome. Okay, doing great. I'll see you guys in 15.
All right.
Perfect.
Hi there. How'd you end up back in the waiting room, Charlie?
Yes, I'm trying to join with my computer instead of my phone just because it's a
Oh,
lot bigger.
sure.
I think I got it now. Okay,
I can
perfect.
hear you anyway.
I will not touch my phone then.
Ah,
Awesome.
it is hard. I try to remember to, and I did put it on silent because otherwise, ding, 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 and it's too
Yeah,
distracting.
too much.
Yeah. Okay. Emmanuel, are you back?
Yes.
Oh, awesome. Okay. So I think we left off with earnest money. Am I right? And we were talking about,
I think so too.
yep, we were talking
Yep.
about all of this about earnest money on B. So this talks about if somebody defaults and kind of describes the basic structure of the interpleader process, which is, essentially a lawsuit between the parties if they can't agree on the disposition of earnest money. Just remember that it's always good to stay out of court, and there have been documented cases of court cases where the legal fees quickly exceed the amount of the earnest money that's in contention. Remember that attorneys charge $400 or $500 an hour. So if you've got a $5,000 earnest money and that's only 10 hours of attorney time. So once you meet with them, have them prepare some documents and appear with you in court, guess what? You're probably over the 10 hours. Now, whoever wins in those cases has to pay the other party's court costs and legal fees. But honestly, it's very difficult to predict some of these rulings by judges. Sometimes each of the parties' cases has some merit. And it's not just the money that's at risk, but there's also, some stress and anxiety for the parties. Also, there's time taken off from work to go to meet with the attorney or go to court. So these are all reasons that it's better to try to negotiate a, mutually agreed upon settlement for earnest money when it's in contention. And we do have a lot of earnest money disputes. Sometimes sellers just withhold earnest money over, well, they would term it principal, but that's really not a reason to hold somebody's feet to the fire or to put yourself at great inconvenience to prove a point. Have you ever heard the phrase, cut off your nose to spite your face? That's a really old-fashioned phrase, but that kind of applies here with people battling over earnest money. Now, certainly if you have a contractual right to the earnest money, and that's fairly clear, I understand why people would go ahead and proceed with legal action in that case. So just kind of to take it on a case-by-case basis. This also, reading over this process for, the interpleader process. And by the way, the initial cost for that is $750. That's on line 37 of that paragraph B. If the earnest money has been released to the seller, it's already in their pocket. It's a lot harder. This process is a lot harder. Another old saying is possession is 9/10 of the law. If those people already have it in their pocket, escrow doesn't really have they don't have the money, so they're not able to execute the process in the same way. So I would advise against early release of earnest money in most cases. Used to be that we would only do that if it was kind of a quid pro quo. In other words, say the lender had a delay at the last minute and the buyer wanted an extension to the closing date. Well, then the seller might say, okay, I'll give you another week, but release the earnest money to me. And if the buyer felt, confident that they were going to be able to close, then they go ahead and release it. But in a competitive market where buyers are up against other offers, they're more likely to want to remove contingencies or, not have contingencies, or do something like release the earnest money to the seller upon mutual acceptance. I don't really recommend that. Because you still got a lot of negotiation ahead of you. You've got potentially the inspection and an appraisal, and maybe a reinspection. So to give up that earnest money, essentially, you're eliminating all your contingencies at the beginning of a transaction. Now, if your buyer understands that and wants to do it, great. But if you have a contract where you have an inspection contingency and a financing contingency, and you release the earnest money to the seller the day after mutual acceptance, you don't have a contingency. That means if your buyer exits the transaction, whether they can't get their loan, they don't like the inspection, or they just default because they've changed their mind or had some other change of circumstance, they don't get their earnest money back. You've already released it to the seller. And if it's been made non-refundable, it's permanently the seller's, no matter what happens in your transaction. So be really careful about that. And a lot of people think that earnest money, oh, I just put that money in escrow at the beginning and I get it back at closing, it's no big deal, but that's not how it works. It is applied to the purchase price. It's not in addition to the purchase price. It's part of the purchase price that gets delivered to escrow early or whenever, however many days after mutual acceptance you write in here. And then it's held there, as I said, as potentially liquidated damages. In case the buyer defaults, that means wants to cancel the transaction without being able to exercise any contingencies. That's the money that they would sacrifice. Right below here, where it says earnest money, where it says to be held by, we're always going to say closing agent. Closing agent is escrow. Most firms in Washington no longer have trust accounts to hold earnest money. The DOL has very strict and complicated laws and rules about holding other people's money, and most of us felt that it was not worth that risk. So it's very rare that you'll have a buyer brokerage firm holding the earnest money. And when you're writing up a deal, it's not going to be us, that's for sure. You're writing up a transaction, always put closing agent. So don't put in the buyer brokerage firm. We don't have that account for that. Don't put in a promissory note, because it just kind of it's like your appendix now. It's there, but it doesn't really serve any purpose. And there are other things that are more important. Okay, line 8 on your default. It's always going to be forfeiture of earnest money. As the buyer's broker, you never want to give the seller the choice to decide what your buyer should sacrifice if they default on their contract. So line 8, you're always going to check forfeiture of earnest money. Because if you check seller's election of remedy, I guarantee you they're going to be attorneys involved. So we don't want that. Okay. Let's talk about how you pick your title insurance company. Well, have you guys seen in listings where listing agents say who preliminary title is open with?
Yes.
It's not unusual to see that. As I mentioned earlier, they'll have already ordered preliminary title, so that you can get that packet of information from them. It's easiest to have title and escrow at the same company. Sometimes you might be somewhere, a county where your preferred closer escrow person doesn't have a title plant, and that, say you have a closer that you really love, and she's out of the Puyallup CW title office, but your client's buying a property in Ocean Shores and CW title doesn't have a title plan in, that would be Grays Harbor County. So you might have to have title and escrow at two different places. But generally, they work hand in glove, and it's a little bit smoother to have title and escrow at the same place. Now, as a broker, and I did work as an escrow closer for a couple of different companies, and so anything you want to ask me about escrow, fire away. But I will say there are a lot of title and escrow companies out there that do a great job. They have very competent closers. And as a selling agent, I didn't want, when I was writing an offer, I didn't want to create a situation where there was a potential counter offer based on title and escrow person. So I would, if the listing agent really wanted somebody, usually I would go with that. I mean, I do price loyalty, in clients, and so I like to be loyal to my preferred closer. But on the other hand, I wasn't going to sacrifice a deal or create a counter offer situation over whether it was going to be, Fidelity or Chicago. So I would always, check the listing, and more often than not, I would go with their closer. Again, it kind of just sets the tone for an easier transaction. Certainly, if you have a really difficult transaction for some reason, I don't know, you're buying a manufactured home on tribal land, something like that. I'm trying to think of the most unusual thing. And you have a closer that like, and trust, and she's done many of these kinds of transactions. Call up the listing agent and say, hey, I've got somebody who knows how to do this, and could we please use them, because they've got a lot of experience in this specialty niche. It's worth a try if it means a lot to you. You certainly want to ask your clients who they would prefer to use. I have never had a client tell me, well, maybe once they had a relative working at a title company, and so they asked to use that title company, and we did. But other than that, they don't know, and they will likely be guided by you. So if you don't have any contacts in the industry, you don't have a history with anyone, you can certainly ask your team, your mentor. We do have an affiliate title company right here in the building that you can use. And again, there are a number of companies that, are national companies with good reputations that do a good job for you. So just remember that there is a rule for us. Well, it's a law, RCW 1885-053, that says that we can't receive any items of value from a title company or another service provider in our industry that is in exchange for us giving them business. So be careful about that. We're not allowed to do that. But again, you can ask your listing broker who they prefer and use them. Remember the issues about title insurance and title issues are on pages 2 and 3 of your purchase and sale. So condition of title is paragraph D here, saying that title to the property shall be marketable at closing. And there are some exceptions to title that are going to run with the land, not with the person. And that means there are exceptions to the title, but they don't. So the buyer has to take title subject to those exceptions, but they don't affect the marketability of the title. So it's okay. And so some of these things would be CC&Rs for your HOA. They're also typically say, utility easements, But it also talks about here reserved oil or mineral rights, mining rights. So a way to give your buyer some extra protection on the condition of title is to include a 22T, which is a title contingency addendum. And I would recommend doing that. It gives your buyer an extra layer of protection and ability to review title and make sure that it's marketable. Now, to use that addendum as as an out for your contract, you do have to give the seller the opportunity to cure any of those title flaws before closing. So if there's something like a federal tax lien, well, that needs to be paid off, or any financial encumbrance, which is the definition of a lien. Any of those things pretty much have to be paid off at closing from seller's proceeds in order to clear title, so it can be transferred to your buyer. Title insurance, there's paragraph E that says that the seller authorizes the buyer's lender or closing agent at seller's expense to pay for the homeowner policy. And fairly standard, using the ALTA, that's America Land Title Association, form of, there's going to be an owner's policy and there's going to be a lender's policy on title insurance. So title insurance is kind of different than any other kind of insurance because it insures what happened in the past. Title companies research a chain of title, everybody that's ever owned the property, to make sure that nobody has a claim on it. And if there is some kind of claim, then it's title and escrow work together to clear those prior to closing. And if something comes up after closing, then your client has paid title insurance to make sure that they have a clear title and the only ones with the rights to the property, so they can file a title claim and get some help if there is any strange claim that comes after closing. Typically, the seller pays for the owner's policy and the buyer pays for the lender policy. That can be changed with an addendum, but that's typical. And to complete my thought about title insurance, most insurance covers against something that might happen in the future. Car insurance, somebody might hit you, or you might hit, you might be in an accident. Life insurance, homeowners insurance. Those are all insuring you against possible future events, but title insurance covers what's past. And that insurance stays in place for the duration of the time that your buyer owns the property, and it's just a one-time fee, so well worth it. Closing agent. So again, we kind of talked a little bit about having title and escrow at the same place. So closing agent is escrow, and you can put in the company, whatever company you like, First American or whatever. And then if you have somebody in specific that you like to work with, or that your listing agent likes to work with, you can put their name in. And sales reps are not closing agents, but I do see those people on contracts sometimes. It doesn't invalidate the contract or anything. If they have been drawn to that company because of a salesperson at the title company, then she will make sure they get assigned to a closer. Okay. Any questions about title and escrow?
Nope.
Nope, I'm good.
Okay. Again, you know, all these terms as you're filling out your offer, you should be in a consultative mode with your buyer so that they feel involved in the decision. You know, things like that we've already talked about, and even title and escrow, you know, they're most of the time, they're not going to have the resources to really frame an opinion on, you know, who would be best for them to use. So make sure you have some suggestions at hand, but in the end, it's always, of course, the buyer's decision. So you want to make them feel in charge. And I remember I would say to the buyers, you know, this is your money, you know, this is your decision. And I'm here to help you with that, but in the end, it is your decision. And let them know they were in control. And that was helpful. Okay, closing date. Okay, here's another one here's a question that, you know, really goes out to, first of all, the lender, and then your buyer, and then the listing agent too. Because we want to establish both the closing date and the possession date. And specifics about those lines are in, I think it's page 3. Yeah, here we go. Paragraph F, closing and possession. And this says, you know, you're going to close on the closing date. That means when documents are all recorded and, you know, funds have been, the proceeds are available to the seller. And this also has an important sentence about the buyer having the right to do a walkthrough of the property within 5 days of closing to make sure the property's been maintained in the way it was when the buyer saw it. I can't even count how many phone calls that I have gotten saying, oh, I went to give the buyers their keys on closing day, and we asked for the washer to be left and it's not here, or the lawn is a foot high and hasn't been mowed for 10 days, or it was supposed to be clean. That's another one. And the buyer doesn't feel it's clean and we're supposed to close tomorrow, and, you know, now what? So do your walkthrough 5 days ahead so that if there is you know, some other thing to be solved, that you have time to solve it. Something like getting the lawn mowed. If you're 5 days out, you call the listing agent and say, hey, you know, you need to get that lawn mowed before closing. If you are at closing day and the lawn isn't mowed, what's the listing agent going to say? Should have asked me sooner. I mean, they might, out of the goodness of their heart, send somebody over to mow, but doubtless, you know, once the seller's closed, are they going to want to then put more money into the property? You know, probably not. And if you're already closed, then, you know, the buyer doesn't have a strong negotiation position. So when does the buyer get to get possession of the property? Well, closing day by 9 p.m. and that's on line 77. Also, look at your calendar when you're establishing a closing day. In escrow, a lot of times people would put closing date on a holiday. By definition, if that happens, the closing will just happen the next business day. But, you know, doesn't hurt to be clear. And a lot of times on those holiday weekends, buyers would want to actually close the Friday before the holiday so they'd have the long weekend to get some move-in chores done. You want to ask your lender, what's our time frame for loan processing for this client? You know, a standard conventional loan is going to close in 30 days. FHA can be 40. VA can be 45, mostly because it takes longer to get the appraisal. How about your buyer? Are they in a rental? How much notice do they have to give? Are they closing on another property or have closed? Are they couch surfing and they want to, get this done ASAP? What about the seller? Are they prepared to be completely moved out on the day of closing so possession can be given to the buyer? Do they need extra time after closing to grant the buyer possession? In really competitive markets, where we've seen more concessions to the seller, it might be something like, well, when my son's house sold, his wife is a teacher. So they didn't know how long it was going to take to sell the house, right? Or exactly how long the time in escrow would be. And she wanted to stay in the house and not be trying to move before the end of the school year. And of course, they were listing late in the spring. So they did get offers. They did accept one, and they said, we need a couple weeks between closing and possession. And the buyer was, willing to grant them that. And there is a form for that if you end up having a seller occupancy after closing is the name of the form, and you need to have that executed and attached to your contract. Buyer occupancy before closing, I don't recommend at all, but there is a form for that as well. And it does occasionally need to be done. I've had some questions lately about what lines 12 and specifically what line 13 means. So let's talk about that a little bit. As far as requesting escrow to pay off lienable utilities, sure, why not? It's part of their job. They do it all the time. Doesn't cost any extra. This way, that any lienable utilities are paid up to date out of the seller's proceeds. So I would always check that. And one of the pet peeves for escrow people is people who check that box and either do not provide a utilities addendum or they put one on there, but it's completely blank. And escrow people do know a lot, but they also work in, just like you guys, in a number of counties. And they don't necessarily know who provides, electricity and gas in Carbonado or, sure, they might know Tacoma and Seattle and, many parts of Snohomish and Thurston County and so on, but they don't know everything. So it's very helpful to have that information. If it is provided to you in the listing, grab that out of the supplements and have your buyers sign it and include it with your contract. I would be real careful about one element of the utilities, and that is septic versus sewer. You want to make sure to verify the kind of waste system that the property has. Escrow can help with that because they'll be asking the seller about that kind of about that whole utility category. And that's also something you want to double check in your inspection. Believe it or not, there have been properties that have been sold. People think it's on sewer and they close and move in, and no, it's on septic. So that can be a bad surprise for people. Have you ever heard of a client buying a house sight unseen?
I did this morning.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Emmanuel, Charlie has a client who's buying a house and they've never even seen it. They
Wow.
won't be in state until they close.
Wow.
So Charlie, tell how we solved that.
Oh, that one wasn't mine. That was for
Oh, I'm
Char.
sorry. Oh, that was Shard. Well, you were on the email chain.
Yes.
So the way we solved it, Emmanuel, was that we just had a brief addendum put on the contract that held us harmless in that transaction, just kind of a broad, because, you know, they're not gonna see it till closing. I mean, who knows what they would,
Uh-huh.
what they
It was
would,
Form 34, right? 34?
yep.
Yep.
And it was just a very general kind of, you know, hold harmless with anything of the transaction. And, you know, if you fill out your forms correctly, you're, you know, on the one hand, they've got a legal and binding contract, weren't under duress, you know, but on the other hand, human nature being what it is, you know, they might get there and the wife bursts into tears and says, you know, I hate the backyard, it looks so much smaller than the pictures, or whatever, you know. And in this case, I think it's a military transfer. And it's in Radiance in 5. So it's pretty homogeneous neighborhood and everything. But anyway, if you have any questions about that or need a hold harmless document for some specific situation, let me know, because I have some templates, but also we do have an attorney that the firm lets me consult with. Now, if you guys want to consult with them, then you'd have to become their client and pay them accordingly. But we occasionally have things like, oh, like when we did the TCPA guidelines, that I had him look those over and make sure that everything was correct. And sometimes situations like this, if we have to write a real specific hold harmless that for a specific situation, then we get some advice on that. So if that comes up, let me know. Don't try to just make it up by yourself. Oh, about the only time I see payment of utilities waived is like if it's a vacant lot and there are no utilities running to the property or something like that. Or if there's a tenant or a relative that's already living in the property that's buying the property, utilities are already in their name, and you know, then maybe you don't need the escrow to pay off those charges. Remind your buyers and your sellers that while escrow can get payoffs on these utilities, they can't open or close accounts for clients. So it's the seller's responsibility to let their utility providers know when their closing date is and that they want their account closed at that point. It's important that they don't say, I want to cancel service, because if they cancel service, that means Tacoma Public Utilities or whomever is going to come in and turn off the power. Then you're going to have a really unhappy buyer on closing day when it's January and they don't have any heat to their house. So it's not to cancel service, it's to close their account. Now, likewise, the buyer needs to contact the utility companies and let them know they're buying the property, when the closing date is, and what do we need to do to set up an account, and get that going to ensure that continuity of service. So everybody has heat and light and much happiness upon moving in, instead of a frantic call to you and to escrow to try, and the utility company to try and get that rectified. And also the utilities do charge a reconnect fee. So that's an extra expense for your buyer if that happens. I've worked with agents. I did some of this, but I don't know that I was totally consistent. But a lot of times I would see brokers who would, or their transaction managers would send out an email, you know, 3 to 5 days prior to the closing date, reminding buyer of stuff they needed to do before closing. And one of them was to call your utility companies, and then they would give the contact information. And these days you probably just, you know, give them the link, or a customer service phone number, you know, for them to get those things set up. Questions about charges or assessments levied before but due after closing.
No, I'm clear.
So what is that? I actually saw this come up on the Facebook page. So this might be something like a special assessment of an HOA, might be an LID, that's local improvement district. Say you live say that the subject property is in an area where there's a whole row of houses that has, a street in front of it and an alley behind it. So they've got alley access to the backyard, maybe a little garage back there. Sometimes the local entity, like City of Tacoma or somebody is gonna repave the alley. Well, they might put an LID on title with an estimated amount. It's not due yet. It's gonna be voted on in a couple of months, so they have an estimate, but they don't have the actual amount. That's the kind of thing that falls in, more commonly, it's like an HOA, special assessment, something like that. So as a buyer's agent, I'd always check prepaid in full by seller at closing. Seller citizenship, I'm seeing more and more FIRPTAs attached to listings. If it's not there, it is due to escrow within 10 days after mutual. You want to make sure that you've got that on your list to follow up on. If the seller is a foreign person, then there are different laws for taxing their proceeds of a sale. They have to pay more. And if they close without disclosing that, and then they go back to whatever country they are from, say it's Mongolia, well, guess what? Your buyer gets left holding the tax bill. So that's one reason where this FIRPTA has become really important and become a standard requirement on all transactions, purchase and sale. And 14 has further explanation on paragraph J. So you can read more about the FIRPTA process and how escrow will collect that money. They really drive that process. So that's why they need to know if the seller is a foreign national or not.
It's like a builder.
Information verification. This is one of the recent changes. This used to be on the back page or the last page of the purchase and sale. And you have the option here of saying how many days do I want for information verification, my buyer, or if you're waiving it or marking it satisfied from the get-go. So we go way back to paragraph W. And this gives the buyer some time to verify all the information provided by the seller or in the listing. And if there is a materially inaccurate information that's found within this time frame, the buyer can get out of the transaction and get the earnest money back. So a good example of this would be, say a property is on septic, it's approved for 3 bedrooms, but they are marketing the house as 4 bedrooms because maybe they put up a partition and made 1 big bedroom into 2. Well, that doesn't change the fact that the septic system is constructed to just serve a 3-bedroom house. So that would, or say the square footage on the listing says it's 2,400 square feet, it's only 1,900. That's a pretty big difference. Another thing to verify during this period would be something like school districts. That just gives the buyer another layer of protection in their contract. And the default used to be always 10 days. I think it is still. Yep, 10 days after mutual acceptance, if not filled in, is on line 221 there. So that's your default time frame. How are you guys liking my purchase and sale here with my little, does it make it easier to follow along or no?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Absolutely.
Then you don't have to look at my face the whole time. That's okay. Agency disclosure. This is where you put down who represents who. Pretty self-explanatory. Usually you're going to be checking buyer broker. If you have like a for sale by owner, you know, and you're representing the buyer, then the seller would be unrepresented, right? Remember that they can't both be unrepresented. You have to represent somebody, or you're practicing law, and we don't have a license for that.
So she doesn't.
Buyer brokerage firm compensation. The way that our agreements are now structured, our listing agreements and our buyer agency agreements, we can negotiate this percentage. So if a seller says, I'm gonna pay 2% and you wanna ask for 2.5%, you can ask for that, just like you can ask for a different price. You can negotiate directly with the seller on this. So those are your options are outlined here. And there is an addendum. Golly, I can't remember the number on it, but if there's, I think it's 47. If you're gonna change the compensation, you can add an addendum. And finally, line 18 addenda, this is where you want to list all the form numbers of any addenda that are attached to part of the offer. So this is the only place to write down all the addendas, so make sure you write them in, because it could be a major legal problem if you have an addendum on your contract and it's not listed on line 18. So basic addenda that you should always use, if you've got a loan, you're going to use your financing addendum 22A. Always use 22D. I just love that form. It's so handy. It has a lot of important additions to the contract. If it's built before 1978, we're going to be using a 22J. 22K is for utilities. 22T is for title. If you have an inspection, you're going to use a 35. If you don't have an inspection, you're going to use a 35W, one or the other. And if you have an inspection, you're going to use an inspector referral disclosure form 41D. So those are kind of the standard addenda that you're going to have on here. And if you have, other addenda, those would be listed accordingly. Here is where you would have your buyer, you would fill out your buyer's information, your information. Again, your seller stuff and listing brokerage is going to auto-populate. Do you have to have the buyer's contact information on here? No, you don't. And a lot of people don't like to put it on there, but I will say that if you want escrow to interact directly with your buyer to facilitate the deposit of earnest money, if you don't put it on the first page of your purchase and sale, when you send that mutually agreed upon contract over to escrow, give them your buyer's contact information. They'll streamline your whole process. And if you've got a seller, same thing. If you don't have their contact information on your purchase and sale, escrow's still going to need to talk to your sellers and get information from them. So they are going to need contact info for them. So save them a step and at least give them an email or a phone number when you send them the contract. Okay, 1 minute to 4, and we did we managed to get all through the purchase and sale. So, woohoo! You guys feeling good about it?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Remember that I'm always available to answer questions, and my philosophy is that I would rather have you ask me the question and do it right the first time than try to fix a mistake or an omission after the fact. Believe me, that's a lot harder. So thank you both.
I had a question, Susan, while we're here. So if someone, let's say that in one of my other transactions, if the other agent tried to send my buyers a form to sign after it was already closed, how would you deal with something like that?
Well, hopefully your buyer would call you and say, what is this?
They did not. They just signed it.
Well, first of all, if it's after closing, I don't even know that it would be enforceable because it's part of the contract that's already closed and done. So you can't really add to it after it's closed.
Yes, I was confused why that was done, but yeah.
What was the form, just out of curiosity?
It was that buyer I told you about who they were, the agent's broker was trying to keep their commission unless they signed,
Oh, that one.
because you had highlighted.
But they
Yes.
didn't even need it.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, they didn't need it, but then the agent went and sent it to my buyers without me knowing, and they
Oh,
signed
wow.
it.
Well, you
Yeah.
know, you could report them for that probably, but I mean,
That'd be messy.
it doesn't really affect the contract. It's just something in their office that she has to check that box. But I would say
Okay.
whoever created that requirement doesn't really, understand the forms because it was
Right.
just a duplication of what was already, we went over that.
Yes,
So,
it was already established.
but that's
Okay,
really
thank you.
strange. Okay, really strange. Okay, well, thank you guys so much. You
Thank
have a great rest of your day.
You too.
Thanks for
You
being-
too, Susan.
Thanks a lot.